President Cyril Ramaphosa has promised to address a range of economic challenges that he describes as, and I quote, deep and structural. The president says fundamental reforms are needed to revive the economy, but the head of the Center for Development and Enterprise, and Bernstein, says investors have little confidence in the likelihood of these reforms being implemented, as the government itself lacks credibility. And she joins us now to talk us through what she means by this. Anne, good morning to you, and thank you very much for your time. Can I start with what you write as a feeling in the country that it is, quote unquote, in terminal decline? What do you mean by those words?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you and your viewers. I think everybody's starting 2022 in a very gloomy mood in South Africa, and this is before the war in Europe, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the consequences of that for South Africa. Why are we all so gloomy? Well, a senior businessman asked me this last week. And I think the reason is we sit with catastrophic unemployment, one of the highest in the world, and it's getting worse, not better. We sit with pretty stagnant growth. You know, it looks better because we're reopening the economy, but the economy is not growing. We're not absorbing the young people coming onto the labor market. We have a fiscal crisis. Again, it looks like it's okay because we've had enormous tax revenues that weren't anticipated, but this commodity boom will not last forever, and we are still paying enormous amounts of money that we should be spending on South African citizens and services. We are repaying our debts.
Yeah.
So, and then most important of all, I think people feel very nervous about a situation where after the July riots last year, or the insurrection, a threat to the state, the police performance was appalling, and no senior person has been charged with masterminding or being one of the leaders of what happened last year. And many people, including the president's own review panel, are saying they're hearing talk of another round of July riots. And I can assure you, if that happens, it will be devastating.
And where do you stand in the debate about South Africa being on its way to being a failed state, but there is a much more forthright view from someone like Neil Froneman, and I wonder whether that's the businessman you're talking about, who is quite emphatic that South Africa is a failed state?
Look, you know, we can throw big words around. My view is that at the bottom line is the South African government doesn't work. What do I mean by that? Well, there are some pockets still of excellence, and we shouldn't ignore that. But overall, national departments, provincial, the vast majority of city councils, local government, not all, but the vast majority, are useless. They're just not performing their job. Then you look at the state-owned enterprises, and they're all struggling. They're very expensive in different kinds of ways, but the major ones cost us all a lot of money, but the services they provide to citizens and to firms trying to get their goods to market are totally inadequate. So we could be exporting more stuff from the mines. We could be exporting more citrus to the world, but the ports aren't able to accommodate this. And this is a consequence of monopoly operations and state capture and corruption.
All right.
So things are really bad, and it's really important that all of us, it's not that I want to depress everyone, it's really important that we're totally honest on where the country is, because that's the only way we can resolve to fix it.
And I'm going to try and insist on this for a little bit. Where do you stand in this argument? I know that you don't want to cause panic. I know you don't want to sound gloom, but the argument or the conversation is going on. And
Sure.
It suggests that the country is either on its way to being a failed state. And by the way, these are words of a very senior government official. That's the Director General of Treasury, who says that we are experiencing symptoms towards being a failed state if we don't pull up our socks.
Look, I agree. I agree that our state is failing. Absolutely. I'm going further and saying it doesn't work at all. So from policing, everywhere you look, we're in crisis. And I think it's really important. So you don't have to push me. I think we are heading towards a failed state. In some parts, we're already there. But there are some key, I think Treasury is a thin blue line that is not failed by any means. And there are one or two other pockets that are not failing. But we are heading towards serious failure across the board.
And I'm going to ask you to stay on for a bit. We need to take a break, and when we return, we're going to ask exactly what she means when she says the government, including President Cyril Ramaphosa, lacks credibility to implement the much-needed changes. So what are the driving factors around this argument? We continue in a moment. Very good morning to you. If you're just joining us, we are in conversation with the head of the Center for Development and Enterprise, Anne Bernstein. And good to have you staying on. You wrote in your piece that President Ramaphosa and his government lack the credibility to implement the much-needed changes in order for the country's economy to see meaningful recovery. What are some of the factors to support your argument?
Look, there's no doubt President Ramaphosa is trying to introduce reforms and changes in essential areas. The problem is, firstly, this is a partial list of reforms. I'll come to that in a moment. But secondly, it's incredibly slow. Take the issue where last year the President persuaded the Minister of Minerals and Energy that we should allow private operators to produce 100 megawatts of embedded energy, or embedded generation it's called. This is good. But it's not happening yet. We have an enormous plethora of regulations and rules and all sorts of things in order to enable this, which means this investment is not taking place. It's much too slow. And you can go through a number of other reforms like that. We're finally getting to the spectrum one. That's good. But there are others that aren't. And anyway, some of these reforms are so partial. So yes, we're going to bring in private sector to some ports, but it hasn't happened yet. And it won't be full competition where we're really going to bring down prices and improve efficiency, which is what we need to do to be globally competitive. It's going to be some kind of other arrangement. And so all the time it's on this reform list of the president's, we're making some progress, but it's unbelievably slow. And often it has to be driven by what is a corrupt and decaying state. But it's really important to understand, in addition, there are other things happening at the same time. So there are other activities being proposed by government that are anti-reform, in my view, from expropriation without compensation, which limits investment in rural and urban South Africa, which the bills are coming this year, to an inadequately conceived and unaffordable approach to national health insurance, to a really inadequate approach to skilled migration, which the country desperately needs skilled people to help drive growth. And I can go on, fixing the mining environment so that we can get new investment in exploration. All of this isn't happening.
And I wonder if the comments of the next person I'm going to tell you about will go some way to support your argument. Peter Atod Montalto, he's head of capital markets research at Intellidex, writes in the Business Day this morning that, and I quote, the SONA was filled with too much hot air on infrastructure spending, yet the budgets are continually underspent. Is government engaged in a PR exercise to look like they are doing something, yet not much is going on?
Infrastructure is a perfect example. We had a workshop last year in October with the leading investors in the country and the most senior people from the presidency down involved in infrastructure. From the talk, you would think a lot is happening. But the head of the Banking Council, CEO of Investec, said there has not been one significant infrastructure project since 2018. Dr. Ramaphosa and the President's office said, I'm really working on 50 projects, but this will take a long time before they come to market. And they're both really saying similar things on both sides. For the private sector to invest, which they're willing and able to do with enormous amounts of money, you have to fix the regulations dealing with public-private partnerships. Why is that taking so long? You have to restore, I don't know what to call it, the rule of law in South Africa. The construction mafias and destruction of infrastructure are inhibiting factors for investment. And there are a number of other things. So there's lots of talk, but in terms of significant public-private partnership, almost nothing is happening. And in terms of government expenditure on infrastructure, I agree with Peter. It's not nearly high enough. So we come back to what you were pushing me on earlier, a failing state, a failed state, an almost failed state, can't drive South Africa's economic recovery. We have said that since the President released his economic recovery plan in October 2020, we said the central flaw of this is that it's built on a capable state, and we don't have one.
The deteriorating state of Eskom, I suspect you are not going to have nice things to say there. This right on the back of an investment conference that is actually going to take place, I think it is next week, if I'm not mistaken. What does that do to attract investment when you are energy insecure?
We won't get investment if we don't fix energy, real investment. And here we are, and we're still having unbelievable load shedding. We're not implementing all the reforms fast enough. And, this whole situation with Eskom's power stations is dire. Again, it leads to a lack of belief by citizens and investors that this will ever be solved. And we still fail to tell the country how we're going to deal with Eskom's debt, which inhibits Eskom. It's just under 400 billion. So it's not that nothing's happening. It's that it's too slow, too partial, not all the way, and there isn't a sense of urgency. Why don't you get a whole lot of people in a room for 2 weeks and say, fix this, sort out the regulations, do this, do that, do the next thing. This is the plan. And you inspire confidence in the country in terms of this is how we're going to fix the entire energy situation, because it's hard to see how Eskom survives. It's in a death spiral. So again, what is the overall approach? My big complaint, the governor of the Reserve Bank often talks about South Africa has to make trade-offs to make progress. And I think one of the problems facing the country, one of the big challenges, is that the government doesn't spell out the real trade-offs we have to make. They're so concerned with preserving unity in the ANC that they don't tell the country exactly where we are and what needs to be done. One of the things that needs to be done is we need competent people in the cabinet in whom citizens feel these are people who could run a modern economy. And with very few exceptions, I don't think anybody feels that.
You could drag out this conversation for some time, and let's conclude the conversation on the score of corruption. I even hate to get your thoughts as to where we are on that score.
Again, yes, we're making a little bit of progress. You can't deny that, but it's not enough. We're facing existential questions for this country, and there was a quote in the Mail and Guardian 10 days ago from Shamila Batoy where she said, the next 6 months she's really going to focus on corruption. And I read it again and I thought, gee, what have you been doing up till now? And why only the next 6 months? What are you talking about? So I just don't think that we're taking this with the urgency that it requires. And most important of all, I'm really concerned about the security cluster and the evidence we have from presidential panels that are telling us there are traitors in our midst, but we don't seem to identify them and charge them. So this is corruption at the highest level, and, throughout the country, we haven't dealt with corruption nearly seriously enough with determination to get some big fish and to charge them and hopefully put some senior people in jail. And that then sends a message to the other crooks in the country, beware, we're coming for you. But we're not sending that message.
Head of the Center for Development and Enterprise, Bernstein, thank you very much for your time.